Hi everyone, welcome back to the painting table. We are continuing on with the Three Kings, and the first thing we're going to do is work on the inner robe on this tall king. We need red earth on our palette and our number 8 oval dry brush and a long piece of drywall mesh. Okay, make sure your piece is long enough to fit over the entire inner robe of this tall king, and place it down somewhat diagonally, like so. Load your brush with red earth and take out some of the paint on a paper towel. And then, just like with all the other times that we've stenciled, be careful to stay within the lines. And make sure to stencil this area up here by his beard. Keep the stencil down on your piece, and we'll do a little bit of highlighting over that stencil with Norwegian orange, so put a drop of that on your palette. Wipe the red earth color off your brush the best you can, and load your brush with the Norwegian orange. Now try to highlight closer to this left edge. And then on this area up by the beard. Okay, we'll see what happened. Yes, that's what I was looking for. I wanted to keep the edge over here somewhat dark still, so it looks like it's been floated. Now let's dry brush highlights on this green robe on the left king, and then also the headdress on the right king. You'll need moss green on your palette and also your number 8 oval dry brush. Just make sure it's nice and cleaned out. Loading my brush again and taking out most of the color on a paper towel. We're getting lots of dry brushing in on this project, aren't we? Okay, starting up at the top here, I'm working in the middle, and I'm not too concerned about going over my jar. I really want the dry brushing effect to be continuous, so if I go into the other base coated areas, that's okay. And then moving down. As you continue layering the color, it will get softer and softer. Okay, and some on the sleeve here. Alright, moving over to the headdress, we'll start at the top. The brightest color being at the top, and then as I move down, it should start fading. A little more color at the top. Okay, also work the sides too. Don't forget your sides. And then the sides of the robe here. Okay, let's move forward and work on the headdress on the left king. We'll need husk on our palette and the number 8 oval dry brush. And we're dry brushing the headdress, so by now you probably know the drill. Load your brush and take out most of the paint on your paper towel. We'll start at the top. It's brightest at the top and then fades as you move down. Now working on the lower portions of the headdress, and the brightest area is on the edge here. In dry brushing this left side here, there are different sections of highlights. To add the stripes next, we'll be using the drywall mesh. So cut about a 6-inch piece of drywall mesh for yourself. Okay, let's work on this upper area above the crown. When pressing down your drywall mesh, make sure to position it so the squares are going down vertically. You'll also need your number 6 oval dry brush and the same color husk. Load your brush and take out some of the paint on your paper towel. And then you hold your brush like this, and you're working on just one stripe at a time. Okay? And then you're going to skip a stripe and work on the next one. So we're working on every other line and creating a stenciled stripe. Now when I pull the stencil back to see what's going on, you can see my stripes have really blended into the highlight color because it's the same color. But we'll be adding warm white to help those stripes stand out. Okay, let's wipe out our brush, and we'll leave a little bit of the husk still remaining in the brush, and pick up some of the warm white and also take some of that out on a paper towel. And now return to your stripes, and we'll be working right over what we just did, adding some warm white. If your dry brush is really splayed and you feel like you can't stay within the boundaries of the stripes, you can always use a round brush and do the same thing. Just carefully go over the stripe sections. As you can see, I've allowed the stripes to go into the crown area to create continuity in the stripes, and I'll be cleaning that area up later. Also, don't forget to add the stripes along the top edge here. Okay, now to add stripes along the left side, try and match up your mesh with the pattern above. And you'll do the same thing here as you did above. You'll dry brush the stripes down the headdress, starting with husk. And then adding warm white to your brush. I have the left side done now, and I'm ready to move over to the right section, and I'm matching up my pattern. I'm doing the same thing here, husk and warm white. To show you how I did this edge, I centered the mesh down so I had 3 vertical stripes, and I found it easier to start the stripes with husk with this brush, the number 6 oval dry brush, and then to add the warm white with this brush. It can be a little tricky to add the stripes to this intersection here. Position the stencil the best you can and go at it from both sides. I'm using my round brush. I found that is the easiest brush to use in this tight area. Okay, this is how mine turned out. As you can see, it's not perfect. I went over the lines a little bit, but hey, it works. Since we've been working with the mesh stencil, we might as well work on this area of the Tall King's headdress and get that done. You'll need the marigold and your number 6 oval dry brush. Lay the stencil down at an angle like so and press it in place. And load your brush with the marigold, wipe it out on your paper towel, and then work at staying within the lines of this area of the headdress. The color should be nice and bright, so you might want to add a few layers. Okay. When you're adding the layers, make sure each layer is nice and light so you don't add too much paint and create problems with your stencil. Now let's highlight this area on the headdress, and we'll use cadmium yellow mid, and we'll add that at a 1:1 ratio to our marigold. I've mixed those two together and I'm taking out the paint on my paper towel. And I'll carefully add a small little highlight to both sides of the headband. Before I do any more painting, I want to take a break and do some cleanup work, and then also transferring of more pattern lines. Well, as you can see, I've transferred some of my pattern lines, the detail lines on the robe. This line here is separating the sleeve and the robe. More details here and the fancy jar, the line for the crown, and then over here the striped lines, and then down here at the treasure chest. So take a moment and make sure you have all that done and clean up your lines with the base coated colors where needed. Okay, now I have everything cleaned up, and I even took some time to base coat the little red medallion with red earth. Now make sure you have olive branch on your palette, and you also need your number 12 flat. Load your brush with the olive branch and then wipe some of the color off on a paper towel. We'll be dry brushing the striped area on this sleeve. So now lightly stroke your brush across the sleeve here, and you're catching the texture on the surface. While your sleeve is drying, take some time to erase the white graphite lines around the fancy jar. Before we do any more on our green robe, we need to add highlights to our fancy jar and add the stripes to the top of this cape. So you'll need wild grape and warm white on your palette, and we'll mix those two together at a 1:1 ratio. You'll also need your number 6 oval dry brush. Go ahead and prep your brush with the paint and wipe it out on a paper towel. And we'll start out here in the top area of the fancy jar. You're adding a small highlight right here. And then a long highlight across the rim of the jar. And then more highlights on the larger area of the jar. Now using the same brush, add a little warm white to the tip and mix it in on your paper towel. And with that color, we're adding a lighter highlight to the side of the jar here. Next, with your number 3 round and the light purple mix, we'll stroke the stripes. After wiping some of the color off on a paper towel, you want to stroke your brush down, creating the stripe, and it will have a dry brushed effect to it. And it's better to start out with a light coat and see where you're at with the paint on your brush, and then you can always go back and brighten up that stripe. Let's brighten up those stripes with a little more warm white, and then starting at the top, just come down like so. Okay, now we're ready to work on the green robe. So put pine green on your palette, and we'll be using the number 12 flat. Before we get into floating our robe, let's apply a thin coat of clear glazing medium to the left king. Side load your brush with the pine green, and we'll start right here under the hand and then next to the sleeve. Now under the sleeve, and then next to the headdress, and around the fancy jar. Now let's work on the sleeve area underneath the headdress, and also next to the trim on the sleeve. While the robe is drying, let's skip over to the king on the right and float shading on his headdress. We're using the same color and our same brush. I'm getting the edge here on both sides, and then also along the top here. Okay, now that we have all the shading done on our green robe, we can line the details that are left. And we'll need moss green on our palette and our number 1 short liner. Load your brush with the moss green and line the details. Just like I've done before with my lining, I like to roughen in first and then go back in and finalize my lines. Keep in mind that there's a small little comma stroke at the end of each detail. Now with the same color and brush, we'll stroke lines on the headdress. And these lines are dry brushed like we've done in the past, so wipe off some of the color on a paper towel. Now make sure to continue those stripes up and over the head. And with this first stripe, I like to start out skinny, and as I pull the stroke, I put more pressure and create a larger line. Now the remaining strokes, and we have 3 of them, will start at the larger end. And we're still trying to get that dry brushed effect, like so. And then continuing those stripes on the side of the piece. After all your light green details have dried, you can take a moment to erase all your white graphite lines. To create the highlights on the line work detail that we've done, we'll need to add warm white to our palette, so we'll mix warm white and moss green together at a 1:1 ratio. Okay, we're using our number 1 short liner, and to add the highlights we want to get a dry brushed effect. So we want to wipe out some of the color on our paper towel, make sure we're starting out with a dry brush, and we'll just lightly pull that color down the stripes. And when I say lightly pull, I mean light pressure. Now let's add highlights to the scrolled detail that we have on the green dress. I'm also not completely covering all the line work. The highlights are here and there. Okay, we're moving forward, we're making good progress. It's time to shade the headdress here on the left, and we will need raw umber and our number 12 flat. Let's start up here next to the crown, and I'm shading right next to the crown on the headdress. Okay, moving down underneath the crown, and then next to the shoulder, and along the edge here. And then make sure and shade along the sides, at the top and the bottom. Now with the same color, raw umber, let's shade portions of the green dress. We don't need to do a lot of shading, just here and there. The one place I can see is right underneath the headdress, right here on the sleeve. And then underneath the sleeve also. Then one more place I can see is right next to the hand. Okay, now transfer the leaf design onto the sleeve and also the dot pattern for the fancy jar. Okay, now that I have my leaf design transferred onto my sleeve, I'll need the color Husk on my palette and my number 1 short liner. We'll be lining the edges of the bottom of the sleeve and also the leaves with Husk. Let's start out with the edges so we know our boundaries. And these lines are not dry brushed, they're just regular line work. You can add flow medium to it so it flows well. Now that we have those border lines on, let's move in and work on the leaves. You'll notice that the leaves get slightly larger as they move down the sleeve. So they start out small up at the top. Next we'll add highlights to the bottom of our sleeve here and then also the headdress, so we need a little bit of warm white on our palette. I'm brush mixing a bit of warm white in with the Husk to create a lighter mix. I don't want to use straight warm white as my highlight color. I want to soften it. Since we've shaded our headdress, I'd like to add a few highlights on the stripes. So take out your mesh again, and this is very random. You're just adding highlights on a few of the stripes, and you're using that same brushed mix of Husk and warm white together. I'm using my round brush. And then also at the top. And then with the same brush, wipe it out and add straight warm white. And we'll go back and catch a few more highlights here and there. It will almost look like there are jewels on his headdress if you do this. Okay, I know we're going back and forth a little bit here now, but I'd like to add a little bit of warm white to a few of the leaves at the top here, so it ties in with the headdress. And it's just a few. And a little bit on the trim. And down at the bottom here on the trim. With Norwegian orange, we'll highlight this area of the medallion on the robe, and then we'll also add a dot to the fancy jar. So you just need a drop on your palette. Load your number 6 oval dry brush and wipe it out on a paper towel. And then we're just adding a slight highlight at the top of that medallion. Next, add a drop of Flow Medium into your Norwegian orange and mix that together, and we'll use that to create the dot on the fancy jar. The size of dot you need is a medium-sized dot. We're going to be putting a rhinestone over it, and we want to still see some of that red showing through. So I'm using a larger end of a brush and creating a medium-sized dot there. Well, hang on to your painting hat. We have a little bit more to do on our three kings. Stay with me and I'll see you in the next video.